let's get into who Coleridge-Taylor was. He was born in England to Alice Hare, who was an Englishwoman, and Daniel Peter Hughes Taylor, who was a West African man. So his father was actually a doctor, and he studied medicine in England. And then he met Coleridge-Taylor's mother, and there's some speculation as to the nature of their relationship. I think there's some confusion as to whether they were actually married when Coleridge-Taylor was born, or if they married at all, or if his father even knew that he had a son. Either way, I think it's important to note that he grew up without his father, and that played a huge part in his, not only his personal identity, but also his musical identity. He spent his life writing works that were, or striving to write works that were influenced by his West African heritage. So specifically, I should mention this, his father was from Sierra Leone. So, and later on in his life, he actually got to be a part of the Sierra Leonean community in London, which I think is important. So he grew up in a musical family. His mother eventually remarried and had 3 other children, and they were all very musical. One of his sisters was a music teacher. He had a brother who played in the London Philharmonic, and he was a violist. So Coleridge-Taylor grew up in a very musical family, and he eventually started violin lessons at the age of 6, and he went on to the Royal College of Music. So when he started at the Royal College, he first started as a violin student, and his professors realized that he had a gift for harmony, so he later changed his studies to composition, and then his secondary study was piano. At the Royal College of Music, he was contemporary with people that we would know, that we talk about in the music world, like Sir George Grove. Sir George Grove was a huge supporter of Coleridge-Taylor while he was a student, and he was partially responsible for getting Coleridge-Taylor into the Royal College of Music. He also was students the same time as Gustav Holst and also Vaughan Williams. They were all students together. So I think this kind of puts Coleridge-Taylor in the world that we study as musicians in the 21st century. After he graduated, he immediately dove into freelancing, and his big break came with his ballade in A minor. There was a festival that that Edward Elgar was approached to write a commission for, but Elgar said that he was too busy, that he couldn't do it, but he suggested that there's this young, up-and-coming, talented composer named Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. I wish you would ask him to do this commission. So Elgar was responsible for kind of giving Coleridge-Taylor his first big break in the composition world, and that resulted in his ballade in A minor, which is an orchestral piece. And it was very well received by the audience and also by the press, and that kind of put him on the map as a composer. The other piece or the most famous piece I think he's most well known for is his Hiawatha trilogy. And this piece was written, or it was conceived while he was still a student, and it was actually premiered at the Royal College of Music. And his own composition professor, Sir Charles Vere Stanford, actually conducted the premiere of Hiawatha, which I think is very amazing. And this Hiawatha, or this piece, was what put him really on the map to be a celebrity, not just in England, but also in America. One important thing to know about Coleridge-Taylor is that he was very well regarded among African Americans, and he was seen as someone that they could achieve to be. He was an example of what Black people, or Black men, in the arts, in the fine arts could be. Because of his celebrity in America, he was invited to do a tour in America, and he ended up visiting 3 times in 1904, 1906, and 1910, and we're going to go into detail about his first visit in just a moment. During his time, or during his career, he established very close friendships and connections with African American leaders and artists that we would know, such as Booker T. Washington, who is an educator, a civil rights leader, a writer. He is the founder of the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. W.E.B. Du Bois, who was also a writer and a leader. And it is known that Du Bois's book, The Souls of Black Folk, was a very huge influence on Coleridge-Taylor. He read the book himself, and he said that this was the greatest book that he had ever read, especially about the Black race. And then he also befriended another fellow Black man in the arts, Paul Laurence Dunbar, who was an African-American poet. So his connection with Paul Laurence Dunbar is very important, so I did want to go into detail about that. So Paul Laurence Dunbar, as I said before, was an African-American poet, and he became famous for what are called his dialect poems. So dialect poems are writings that he wrote in the African-American vernacular. So you'll hear words like ain't and things like that in his writings. They first encountered each other in London in the late 1890s, and they knew who each other were. Paul Laurence Dunbar knew who Coleridge-Taylor was, and Coleridge-Taylor knew who Paul Laurence Dunbar was, and they sought each other out when Paul Laurence Dunbar was in London. And they got together and they produced a joint recital. So at this recital, Paul Laurence Dunbar gave readings of his poetry, and Samuel Coleridge-Taylor presented compositions that he had wrote. And some of these compositions were based on the writings of Paul Laurence Dunbar. So some of those works include songs like Corn Song, When Melindy Sings. There's also a song cycle called African Romances that are based on all Paul Laurence Dunbar poetry. So this connection was very important for Paul Laurence Dunbar, for Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. So in reflecting on Samuel Coleridge-Taylor's experience with Paul Laurence Dunbar, his daughter, who actually wrote a biography, not just an autobiography of herself, but also included a biography of her father, and this is Albert Coleridge-Taylor I'm talking about. She said this: his meeting with Dunbar deepened his pride in his origins and his concern for Black people, and it inspired him with a feeling that there was a new philosophy concerning liberty to explore across the Atlantic. So Coleridge-Taylor discovered that he was free to write music that reflected his West African heritage, and so he did. So when you look at any biographies of Coleridge-Taylor that includes an appendix of his works, such as Albert Coleridge-Taylor's biography and another biography that was written by Coleridge-Taylor's own colleague, you'll see that any works that have some sort of African influence, like in the title, for example, appear right around the time that Paul Laurence Dunbar met Coleridge-Taylor. So I think that's very interesting. So, as I mentioned before, Coleridge-Taylor made a visit, or several visits to America, and his first one was in 1904. So, this first was discussed around 1901, and this happened through the S. Coleridge-Taylor Choral Society. So this was a society that was formed by Mamie Hillier, who was basically a Black socialite in DC as well, and it was formed along with her friend Lola Johnson, who was a vocalist. And they wanted to form an organization that would honor the musical works of Coleridge-Taylor and give opportunities for performances of his works. So the S. Coleridge-Taylor Choral Society, was formed, and they first, this was a result of the fame of his Hiawatha. So that's how famous that piece was. So they decided, Mamie Hillier and Lola Johnson, that they would invite Coleridge-Taylor to America to conduct a performance of Hiawatha that would be sung by the S. Coleridge-Taylor Choral Society. And he agreed. So there was a lot of planning that happened, and he eventually came to America in November of 1904. While he was there, he made visits to several cities, and this includes Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia. And he, again, conducted the S. Coleridge-Taylor Choral Society's rendition of Hiawatha. And while he was there, he actually became the first Black man to hold a baton over the Marine Band, which I think is the U.S. Marine Band. So what had happened was they were trying to find an orchestra to perform the orchestral part of Hiawatha, and they ended up hiring the U.S. Marine Band. So there you go. While he was there, he also visited several Black schools, and this includes Howard University, Washington Normal School, and the Armstrong Training School. And this is another experience that Coleridge-Taylor had that was very pivotal in his career. He had the opportunity to make connections with and engage with people of his own race who shared his interests and his sentiments about classical music. And it was just as important, I think, for Black Americans to interact with Coleridge-Taylor. It meant to them that the Black race could hold an important place in the fine arts, which was often exclusively reserved for whites. And I do want to mention that it's possible that some of the people that he shook hands with while he was in America might have been former slaves, because he wasn't that far removed. So I think if anybody that he encountered was a former slave, they probably thought, this is so awesome, like this is what Black people can be. So this was a very important time, not just for him, but for African Americans that lived during this time. In conjunction with his first American visit, he was asked to write a collection of Negro melodies for solo piano, and this became his 24 Negro Melodies. So this is arguably one of the most substantial solo piano arrangements of folk songs, of Negro spirituals, of melodies from the Black Diaspora during his lifetime. They come from all over the Black Diaspora, from Southeast Africa, South Africa, West Africa, the West Indies, the United States. And I think it's important that he decided to write works that reflect all of the African diaspora. He could have just chosen to write a book of West African melodies, or a book of African melodies, or a book of American melodies, a book of Negro spirituals, but he decided to include melodies from all over. And I think that collection in and of itself is unifying of the Black diaspora, just because he includes music from all over. Interestingly, the preface in the 24 Negro Melodies was written by Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington was someone who was very in this community, and he knew everybody. So he knew Coleridge-Taylor, they corresponded, and I think he was partially responsible for planning the visit, Coleridge-Taylor's first visit, and Coleridge-Taylor asked Booker T. Washington if he would write a preface, and he did, and Coleridge-Taylor himself also writes a foreword. The way that Coleridge-Taylor arranges these melodies, he calls it a tema con variazioni, which is a theme and variation. He has what he calls, and I'll just actually skip ahead a little bit. He has what he calls a motto at the very beginning of the arrangement. So it looks like a shorthand, I hate to say transcription, but a shorthand transcription of what somebody heard that they wrote down, what they heard by ear. And then he has the text when it's available with the motto. And then after the motto, there is the solo piano music. So the motto is the theme, and the solo piano music that follows is the variation. So I did want to say that. I do want to say that because of time, I don't have time to talk about everything that I would love to talk about with these 24 Negro Melodies. There are a lot of African diasporic idioms that Coleridge-Taylor uses so interestingly and so beautifully to bring out the meaning of each melody. But today, we're only going to talk about two, so I'm very sorry about that. The first thing I would like to mention is the drum call, and this also has to do with call and response. So, arguably, the drum is one of the most important, if not the most important, African instruments. So, and Coleridge-Taylor knew this, and I said before that he grew up not knowing his father, but I think it has been suggested in research that he may have started corresponding with his father later in his life. And there is an interview that he did with the Musical Times, which is a music magazine from way back when. And he mentions that his father fancied an instrument called the kolangi. And I think it's interesting that he knew the specific name of the instrument that his father liked to play. So it's not unfathomable that he had specific knowledge of other instruments. It's not unfathomable that he had specific knowledge of different drums. So in the first example, which is from the 8th melody called Olaba, it's a West African melody, he specifically uses the dun-dun drum, which is a West African drum. So I think it's interesting that he knew what this drum was, and he decided, this is how I'm gonna put it in this music. So with drums, when he puts drums in his music, it usually happens at the very beginning, so then it becomes a call, and then it's followed by a very sweet melody. And the drum call is written either in octaves or in open intervals, and there's usually a unique rhythmic figure. So I'm gonna play just a little bit. I guess I'll take this with me. Okay, so I'm gonna play the first example, which is the first few measures of Oloba, just to demonstrate the drum. Same thing with the other example. This is the bambula, and this is from the West Indies. A bambula, I should also say, is another kind of West African drum. And that's it. Another thing that he does in his 24 Negro Melodies is the way he brings out the text of the songs. And this is more relevant, I shouldn't say relevant, it's more, I guess, more better observed in the American melodies. So I have two American melodies. The first, and they're both Negro spirituals. The first is I'm Troubled in Mind. So Coleridge-Taylor, sometimes in the melodies, he'll write something specific if a certain melody sticks out to him. For this one, I'm Troubled in Mind, he writes this at the bottom. One of the most beautiful Negro melodies. It is said that a certain slave used to sing this song with so much pathos that few could listen without weeping from sympathy. So the text for this is, I'm troubled, I'm troubled, I'm troubled in mind. If Jesus don't help me, I surely will die. So that is the character of the spiritual. And there are several things that Coleridge-Taylor does. He writes the melody, so I'm troubled, in the bass of the piano. So Coleridge-Taylor also knew quite a few singers, so he could have been thinking of a male voice singing, or he also could have put it in the bass just to bring out that pathos character. So for example, another thing that he does is the way he places musical markings that indicate emphasis. So for example, let me see if my, oh, is it off? No, there we go. Can you see the laser point? Okay, so this accent right here falls on the first syllable of troubled. So troubled, of course, is an important word, and that's how he chooses to emphasize that word. And then as you continue on, this marcato marking places emphasis on the word me. So marcatos, he usually places those on notes with longer note values, and I think that's meant to indicate that we should rest. So there's a little bit of a different kind of emphasis, and it's meant to rest on that note. And so we're resting on the word mind. I'm troubled in mind. And the other American melody, Many Thousand Gone, this spiritual, the text says, no more auction block for me. And this was sung by slaves who were attempting to escape during the Civil War. So they're saying these things, no more auction block, no more pint of salt, that was a slave ration, no more driver's lash, that was what slaves would be punished with if they got out of line. And what Coleridge-Taylor does is, number one, he puts these rolls at the very beginning, and they're separated between the hands, and the rolls indicate a sort of drudging, like a dragging character. So remember, there's a slave who is singing this, and they're thinking about running off. And you can imagine that perhaps they're in the field working and they're dragging along, but they're singing these words to themselves. Once again, Coleridge-Taylor uses different emphasis markings. Specifically, just as in I'm Troubled in Mind, he uses accent marks and he uses marcatos. This first accent mark, if we think about the text, no more auction block for me. So me is a very personal word, and remember, a slave is singing this to themselves, so no more for me. The other thing that he does is an accent mark followed by a marcato mark, and these are on the words no more. So me and no more are very strongly emphasized, and they're very important, in this melody. So I am going to play in its entirety Many Thousand Gone. And while I play this, I have this picture that you can look at while I play. So this is called The Fugitive Slave, and over here you see this man, he's hiding behind some thick grass, and if you can look really carefully, you'll see these men on horses, and these are presumably slave catchers who are looking for this man. So remember, he's singing this song as he is escaping during the Civil War. So just think about that while I play this piece.